we're about to get into podcast mode. And first and foremost, the only way to start a proper manufacturing happy hour episode is with a cheers or a prost, since we're here at Googman House. So cheers, prost, everyone. Welcome to Manufacturing Happy Hour. And we have a very, I would say, unique range on our panel here tonight. We have, to my left, we have Kathy Miller, who is actually an alumni of Manufacturing Happy Hour from way before we'd even done 100 episodes. So it's been a long time coming to have you back on the show. A wealth of experience in the manufacturing industry, from leadership roles at Rolls-Royce, Parker Hannifin, the author of Steel Toes and Stilettos, co-author of Steel Toes and Stilettos, and a new book coming out later this year as well. We have on the far left, Noel Hopkins from CLA. Noel, great to have you here. And I would describe Noel as a digital transformation expert. Then finally, we've got Steve Martin, who has history in private equity. You're a board member at Elevate Ventures right now, which I believe was created by the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. So we're going to be having a lot of conversations around topics and exploring the impact of leadership, digital transformation, as well as a local ecosystem on how that all evolves. We'll talk about that in the context of Indiana, but also broader topics as well. So that's just my intro really quickly. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves real fast, but first I want to thank a couple groups that have made this event possible. First, let's give a round of applause for Clifton Larson Allen, CLA. This is Leslie Boyd's home game here tonight here in Indianapolis, so round of applause for them. Leslie had approached me about the idea of doing a tour, collaborating, I think late last year, and this was just the perfect opportunity to make it happen. So thank you all for being here. Also, shout out to the Association for Advancing Automation, another great partner. Let's give them a round of applause as well. We've had a lot of presence from A3 member organizations, and we're just 2 dates into the tour so far. I know Wasion Machine is represented here tonight. Kuka Robotics is here tonight. Anyone else I'm missing, feel free to shout them out. Okay, so I caught the 2 member organizations that are here right now. Well, hey, thank you to A3, thank you to CLA for making all this possible. Now, in the true spirit of Manufacturing Happy Hour, I'm Chris Luecke, I'm the host of the show, but the way we start off any of these podcasts is people describe what they do as if they're having a drink with one another. So let's go down the line. Noel, we'll start with you, Steve will go to you, and then Kathy will finish with you. So when you're having a beer with someone at Googman House Brewing, how do you describe what you do, Noel?
Yeah, thanks for having us on, Chris. So I work with manufacturing business leaders to help them overcome business challenges, realize opportunities with technology. And technology's played a role in manufacturing for many years, and we're at a point now where digital technology and AI is becoming ever more critical. So looking forward to the conversation today.
I don't know exactly how to introduce myself. I always describe myself as a private equity mercenary, but I spent a good deal of my career helping private equities buy manufacturing companies, which actually gave me a vision on how they actually perceive value, or sometimes incorrectly perceive value. I am a former mercenary, as I'm a retired person, but most of my time now I'm spending around economic development with the IEDC, and also you mentioned Elevate, which is our public-private investing arm for venture development here in the state of Indiana.
And I'm Kathy Miller, and I am in Kathy 2.0 stage of my career. Kathy 1.0 started at 17 years of age as an industrial engineering co-op student at a vehicle assembly plant. And since then, I worked at Delphi, Parker Hannifin, Rolls-Royce, Vertiv Corporation in leadership roles, both of the business and manufacturing. So now I'm a coach, a consultant, an author, a speaker, a board member. I just have a whole range of fun things I do to help manufacturing these days.
So we have a wealth of experience, I would say also a wealth of local experience up here tonight. And the way Manufacturing Happy Hour works is we want this to be a little celebration of Indiana manufacturing here, but folks across the country, across the world are going to be listening to this episode, and there are a lot of things that this region is doing right, and a lot of things that Noel and Kathy and Steve have seen not only here but throughout their careers they can talk to on how it takes a combination of digital prowess, having the right leaders, having the right involvement from the ecosystem. And that's what we're going to be exploring tonight. So let's go really Indiana-centric at first. Steve, this first question is for you. What can manufacturers learn from the things that Indiana is doing right as a region to thrive as a manufacturing ecosystem?
Well, I think the first thing you have to understand with Indiana is how manufacturing focused the state is. And when people think of manufacturing, they may think of Michigan, they may think of Ohio, they may think of automotive and Big Four that comes north of the border of the state of Indiana. Indiana probably has the most manufacturing-centric economy in the country. I think by almost 10 points. So if you look at the GDP of our state that's driven by manufacturing and or all the associated economy that's driven by manufacturing, it's about 48% of our economy. So as goes manufacturing in the state of Indiana, so goes our economy. And so if you think about how our economy can thrive, it's how do we incent and encourage and develop manufacturing in our state.
Noel, I'm going to pass this to you next, and a slightly different question, because you're speaking with a lot of organizations on digital strategy. When it comes to continuing to thrive, what role does digital transformation or digital in general play into that? I'd love to hear your take on that.
Well, I think it's critical, especially right now. We're at a really important inflection point for technology and specifically AI. The thing that's changed in the last few years is the accessibility, the ability to adopt digital technology and AI. The barriers to entry have really been removed because today any business, large or small, can leverage technology. And what's exciting, I think, about Indiana is that we've got this wonderful manufacturing heritage that Steve described, but we also have a really thriving technology center here in Indianapolis and in the state of Indiana. And the ecosystem of the tech hub combined with that manufacturing heritage gives us a really great opportunity to thrive at this inflection point.
And Kathy, I like how you described that you're in the 2.0 version of your career, because you've been leading these manufacturing companies in the past. Now you've been writing about them, you're consulting with them. What are you seeing from your perspective? What is another piece to this puzzle, maybe from the leadership perspective, that these organizations need to thrive? You've got the heritage, you've got the technology. What else do you need there to complete that puzzle?
You really need leadership that's very strong. All companies are going to go through some level of digital transformation, or they're probably not going to be a company anymore. And so it's really important, as we look at this new technology, to have leaders who know how to drive transformations, right? So they have to be willing to embrace it, but they also have to know how to bring people along, people that have been doing things manually for a long time and may feel intimidated by the technology that's coming. So I think it's really important to have strong leaders, to equip our leaders to know how to communicate effectively, how to be able to have digital and difficult conversations with people, right, about what's coming up. We have to have a plan to upskill our people, right? And just make sure that we are constantly explaining to them not just the what, but the why and the how, and making them feel like they can be a part of that transformation, that they're doing it with the company, that the company's not doing it to them. And I think that's very important.
You don't have to answer this right now, but I do have a follow-up question on that, because you've gotten to see this from a lot of different organizations that you've worked with, people you've consulted with and spoken with. I'm curious what that characteristic of those leaders that allows that gets them to get people to come along with them is if there is a common thread that you see. We're going to cover this topic a little more down the line. So if you have an answer now or a story that backs that up, great. But if not, you can think on that for a little bit as well.
Okay. I'll give a little answer and then I'll expand upon it, right?
I like it.
You got to have optimistic leaders, right? An optimist isn't about, just wearing rose-colored glasses. It's about someone who can embrace the future and sees challenges as opportunities and can help drive that vision through their organization as well. So, there are really science-backed ways to increase your optimism. So we can equip leaders with those tools to help them get there.
I really like that answer because it's almost a too perfect segue into my next question, which is going to be a bit of a downer. So, I wanted to start off with, hey, what are the things that Indiana is doing right? And Steve, I know you've seen a lot, and you can kind of share, hey, what are areas that maybe we're on the right track, but we could start to improve a little? I believe you described it as maybe a front door, back door problem at one point.
Well, by saying I've seen a lot really implies that I'm old, which I tell people I'm a retired mercenary in private equity, which actually is a filter that actually is probably something that's really formed my worldview on how business actually could thrive, but what are the downsides of it? And I always describe Indiana as having what I call a front door and a back door problem. The front door is that we need to create ideation businesses in our state. So innovation is really driven by people that create ideas and then are encouraged through the proper ecosystem in our economy to create businesses out of those ideas. And that's both capital formation and talent formation. But then I say that we really, as a state, have a backdoor problem. And through the lens of private equity, often what happens is that we grow these wonderful private businesses and we scale them to a particular size, but then they become actually almost too big for the people that own them, so they need institutional capital. And unfortunately, if we don't do that as a state properly, we lose control of some of our most important employers. And so one of the backdoor problems I describe when I'm thinking about this is how do you create what I call a platform company? How do you take the organization that you're building and create the pieces that can create both transferable value to somebody who's an institutional owner, but also can be scaled on? And so that's the challenge of the manufacturer that has been successful at a product-centric, strategy that needs to go to the next level. And that is the inflection point where we can have a really either constructive or deconstructive effect on our economy.
We're going to get back to that scalable ownership towards the end. Noel, I'm going to send the next question to you. We were just talking about one of the challenges at a state level, for example. What are the challenges you're seeing at a technical level that companies, whether it's here in Indiana or elsewhere, that you're seeing right now?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what Kathy was saying, which is that there's a lot of curiosity around technology at the moment because we all know that there's a lot of activity in the world of artificial intelligence, and sometimes it's tempting to start with the technology and figure out how you might apply it. But the businesses that are really thriving in this environment are the ones that start with the business challenges and opportunities and the people and bring them along on this journey of discovery. And the answer may well be a digital solution or partly a digital solution, but by bringing the people along with you, you've got the opportunity to shape that change and to manage that change most effectively. And at CLA, we have a very unique opportunity to work in many different states. So we see how this is being done well, and we see where it's not being done as well. But I do think it is the big differentiator today. And as businesses look to scale and grow and overcome challenges like supply chain issues, material costs, labor shortages, how to leverage technology not to replace or displace people from the workforce, but to elevate and empower them to be doing more valuable activities, I think is key.
I'm going to ask you about other states here in a second, but Kathy, I saw you nodding along. I'd love to hear what you would add to Noel's answer.
Yeah, it's just when we are implementing technology, we need to do it with intentionality. You know, I have the wearable glasses, right, where you've got augmented reality and instructions on. They're really cool in a manufacturing demonstration, right? They may not be so cool to the guy who has to wear them 8 hours a day, right, and has been doing it. So sometimes we have this cool technology and we're looking for a problem to solve it with versus, you know, the other way around. So, but if you can stay open to that, you know, think about when you have new employees and training new employees, and can you use that application for the first 30 days so they come in and feel like, first of all, for the younger generation, I'm working with really cool technology here, but also for all generations, I can master this. I can do this. I haven't worked in an environment like this, but they're investing in technology and training me to make me feel connected to the bigger purpose.
Kathy and Noel, I'm going to ask you both this question. Whoever wants to go first, kind of raise your mic up once I start asking the question. But the way I want to ask this is, are you seeing less companies do the technology for the sake of technology approach now? Is that an increasing trend, a decreasing trend? Because I guess I've been in the industry for a decade and a half now, and I like to think, you know, as more leaders start entering the industry, they're not looking for, you know, technology for the sake of technology. They're very deliberate about the things they're evaluating. But from your conversations, from your experience, would you say leaders are finally evaluating technology when it makes sense, or they're still evaluating technology just for the sake of it? Kathy, you raised your mic first, so you're up.
No, it's definitely going in the right direction. I think people are really starting to understand from a few miscues, right? Like, we can use these robots to do all these things, but why, right? So I really do see people being, and companies being more intentional, particularly in the safety arena. You know, what are things that we're asking humans to do that would be better for people? You know, the repetitive, monotonous, ergonomic challenges, or hazardous jobs, right, where there's risk. So as people are understanding the technology and the capabilities of it, I definitely see a good trend.
I think the other macro thing that's happening right now is we're living through the largest transfer of wealth ever, where a lot of generational businesses are transferring to new ownership. Maybe it's the family transferring to younger generations, maybe it's private equity or other businesses being bought. And there's a lot of pent-up energy to adopt change and innovation as that change happens. So I think that's just accelerating this adoption, and I think it's helping to focus attention of these businesses who see a lot of potential to drive efficiency, to scale and grow, that maybe has been pent up for many years, but now the generational leadership is there that's going to drive the change.
I like both of your answers to that. Steve, you've been like leading off most of our questions so far, so you're going to back clean up on this next one. And Noel, you're actually going to go first because you brought this up. You know, CLA works with clients from across the country, so you see things in a lot of other regions. And before we jumped up on stage, we were talking about the report that CLA recently published on what Florida manufacturing is doing right, for example. Like between, I think it's 2014 and 2022, like an 8-year period, their manufacturing GDP increased something like 66, 67%, like a relatively astronomical, consistent increase number right there. So this question is, we were talking about Indiana for a bit. What are some lessons you've learned from other areas, particularly on the digital front?
Yeah, I think when we've witnessed that firsthand at CLA, what we're seeing is some of what we've already talked about. So maybe in some ways, having a lot of newer businesses with a fresh set of eyes has helped states like Florida be more forward thinking. So there's some lessons that we in Indiana can probably learn from states who are not as don't have as much background to dwell on. Those states who are seeing the most growth are absolutely leveraging a dynamic model. They're not tied into a very stagnated, rigid supply chain. They've got the flexibility to be dynamic. They understand forecasting. They can project into the future demand and pricing changes of materials. They've got a workforce that is there because they want to be there, and they're empowered by technology. So they're not bringing in the best graduates from the country to have them enter numbers in a spreadsheet or inspect components visually, manually. They're having them make more interesting, exciting, valuable decisions. So it's sort of a snowball effect. You know, you set the business up to thrive with technology underpinning a lot of what you do. It attracts the best talent, that drives innovation, and it continues to grow. So I think there's some lessons that we can learn here in Indiana from states like Florida who are doing a great job of that.
Kathy, you've co-written one book. You have another coming out later this year. What are some lessons you've seen from, let's say, outside of your past experience, being at Rolls-Royce, being at Parker Hannifin, things that you've seen recently that you think other manufacturers could emulate anywhere across the country?
Yeah, well, I think what's really important is that no matter what technology we're working with, what inventions, manufacturing is about people, and so we can't lose sight of that. And being able to work with people and help them see meaning in what they do, right? Beyond that role that they have, that they're connected to a bigger purpose is important. We talked a little bit about optimism and being able to see setbacks as just challenges to overcome and possibly even spark innovation. And the third one, which you alluded to without saying it, is relationships, right? The four of us don't know everything there is to know about manufacturing. So get to know other people, realize that there's so much out there. And people, when you approach them, unless they're a direct competitor, are very generous, right? They want everybody to succeed. And so just developing relationships with people that you can help and they can help you accelerate your journey are just so important.
Steve, looking across borders, what are some things you've seen other regions do well that would be worth emulating here in Indiana or for manufacturers listening across the country, across the world?
You know, I'd probably go beyond borders, and I said I describe myself as a private equity mercenary. And while I make fun of the entire group of private equity people because they're worthy of making fun of, the other thing that I've learned is they think very systematically about markets and how to address markets. And so when we talk about innovation, we talk about integrating, technology inside of an organization, you really need to look at it through the lens of what is the size of the market you're attacking? How can I scale that business using that technology effectively? How can I address, changes in my own cost structure to make a competitive advantage? But generally when I'm working with companies, I describe the strategic planning process quite this simply. It's like, what is the total addressable market with your capabilities that you could pursue, and what's your core competency, which is know thyself? And so when I look through the lens of private equity, they think in terms of capturing share. When I look through the lens of a private business owner, I ask the question, what are you really great at? And how can you use changes that are coming through new technology, new innovation that are in front of you to basically optimize your business? And so it's inside and out. So I always tell people I have a love-hate relationship with private equity because they've taught me a lot, but they're very impersonal. And I'm very big on the personal relationship of running a business. So running a business, running a manufacturer where you have people, I say you work with people that live and die. There's a famous line out of It's a Wonderful Life, which is the very people that we make fun of. The people that are running the machines are people that do most of the living and dying around here, and they're also where most of the good ideas come from too. So.
I watch that movie every Christmas time. There's a nice theater in Milwaukee that's like one of those old school theaters that I do remember that line. It's a classic George Bailey line. Does anyone else remember that line? Here, like raise your glass. Okay, all right. We got some Wonderful Life folks out there. All right. Well, we're going to come back to that topic that you mentioned around aligning business with your strengths. Know thyself. We'll get there during our last round of questions. Noel, I've got one more for you before we get kind of our wrap-up portion of this discussion. One thing we've talked about leading up to this is how are technology and digital specifically being used as a differentiator within manufacturers. You see this on a constant basis in your role. I'd love to hear a story that kind of illustrates that as we wrap things up, to put a wrapper around a lot of the great points you've made throughout this discussion.
I'm just wondering whether we're going to make Kathy's book. Do you think this will make it into a chapter, Kathy, this podcast?
There's still time. I got about a week left.
I better make this answer very memorable.
Yes.
So I guess there's a couple of ways that I see technology being implemented in manufacturing right now. And if you think about some of the things we've already talked about, the first one is automation, right? So there's a lot of things that we all have to do in our day-to-day role that we may consider necessary, but maybe not high value. And that could be in the back office. It could be on the shop floor. Those areas for automation are increasingly more viable for leveraging things like AI. And by taking away that mundane, repetitive task that Kathy mentioned earlier, what we're doing is freeing people up to do things that are more valuable. So automation, removing the mundane, elevating people to be more valuable, and hopefully give them more rewarding roles is first thing. The second one is more about knowledge. So in many businesses we work with today, there are individuals who hold a lot of knowledge, and in their experience, they've gathered an enormous amount, a wealth of knowledge that helps the company operate. And what we're finding is those folks who have been there for 20, 30, 40 years, eventually they're not going to be there. And those businesses are realizing that without those individuals, they have a business continuity challenge, and they already have a problem because they can't scale. And what we're finding is there's a great application of these things called large language models, where you can take huge amounts of information, put it in a place where it can be queried in much the same way as like a ChatGPT interface, and query this wealth of knowledge that exists within the business. And most engineering firms today have so much data because engineers love data. Do you know why engineers love data?
I could take a few guesses, but I feel like you have a punchline.
Well, I used to be an engineer. I just wasn't a very good one, so I went into digital instead. But engineers like to be the smartest people in the room. Did you know that? There's a lot of accountants here that would argue with that, but engineers like to be the smartest people in the room. But without data, we're just guessing, right? We don't have enough information to make what we call an engineering judgment. So engineering companies, manufacturing business have enormous amounts of data. The challenge has always been, how do you extract the value from that? Because it's probably in silos, it's probably unstructured, it's probably in a combination of paper and electronic documents. Today, we can gather that data, we can read those documents, we can sort that information using these large language models, and suddenly we can expand the opportunity to get value from that data.
Well, it's also it's one of the things I like about being the host of Manufacturing Happy Hours. I get to hear stories, and sometimes there's some like Venn diagram overlap between the morals of those stories, and you're maybe the second or third person, which is a good thing, to bring up the power of artificial intelligence and large language models in terms of being able to query all the data that's at a company. Because if you think about it, like all the time, like on this show, the number one theme that comes up is the skills gap, the retiring workforce. Comes up all the time, so much so that I have to tell people, it's like when they bring it up, it's like, hey, did you know there's a skills gap going on? It's like, yes, like our audience is all manufacturers. But if you can tell me like your unique perspective, your unique story on that, let's give us a new way to think about that challenge and how manufacturers are solving it. I love that that's something that's coming up on a more regular basis as a real tangible, like, kind of back to one of our earlier topics. Don't just go implement technology for technology's sake. If you can go implement technology so that way you can make use of the data that's within your organization, so that way you can capture that tribal knowledge that's about to walk out your door. I'm glad you emphasized that in this conversation tonight. So we've got one more round of questions before we wrap this up. So Steve, we'll go back to what you were talking about earlier. How do you build scale and transferability within organizations? We're going to bring this home back to Indiana for a second. You mentioned that, that's ultimately what you need to take that company to the next level. Can you share a little bit more about that?
I use the 3 Ps as it relates to scale. People, and that generally has to do with the skill set of the people. And so as you build a business, I always say businesses go through evolutions, which are, in essence, span of control. And so how do I create leadership that can take technical talent and actually scale that to the entire organization? It's planning. So how do I create a strategy that takes advantage of my skill sets? And the last one is process. And I always talk about process as being method. And I think of that as being an integration of technology, but it's also an integration and a systemizing of the processes and an alignment of those physical assets so that we can actually use the data that our systems are generating so that we can actually inform the strategy. It's all about how do I make the processes easier and more efficient. And scale is all about doing more with less. And the only way you know how to do that is with talent, with a vision for what the strategy is, and having processes that actually can be scaled across the organization to basically produce more with less.
Kathy, I'm going to go to you next. What does that vision look like? Because Steve's been emphasizing how important leadership in all of this is. I'd love to hear maybe an example or a story or like a key takeaway for the audience in the context of what does leadership look like for having the vision that allows you to achieve that type of scale?
So it starts with having a vision. It doesn't happen by accident, quite honestly. And you've really got to have someone who has the vision, and then you have to have people who can execute on that vision, right? But you also have to be able to have flexibility, adaptability, and pivot, because all of these things are just accelerating at unprecedented rates, right? So you've got to have leadership that embraces the ability to change as technologies change. But when you look at humans, right, and what's important to them is they want to derive meaning. They want to be connected to something larger than themselves. They want to feel good about, what they're able to contribute on a daily basis. And they want to be connected and part of community. And so as we scale, we can't forget about those basics. And it's really an exciting time right now. It's really an exciting time. But, the smartest technology person might not be the best people leader, right? They may be, they may not be, except for Noah. Noah's the exception. But we can teach people leadership skills. And so I think that's very, very important that we don't forget about that when we think about upskilling, right? We're typically thinking about the technical aspects, but there can also be the people aspects taught. And we really need to do that, or I think we'll fall short of the visions we want to enjoy.
I don't know if this is the right takeaway I should have gotten from that answer, but Noel, I was just thinking with all these new tools, with large language models, artificial intelligence, are you finding that the new tech is allowing people to get more meaning from their work? And if so, how?
That's a great question. I think I had the opportunity to work for and subsequently work with a lot of the largest manufacturers and engineering companies in the state. And from inside the companies and from outside helping them, I think one of the things that has been true in both cases is the willingness to move at pace and occasionally make mistakes, knowing that this is not like a well-charted path. This is an inflection point. It is a very fast-moving area of technology. It's having a huge effect on our industry. And so the cultural things that Kathy outlined are important because we've got to go through change. But we've got to be okay with being a little bit uncomfortable. We've got to be okay with our processes, Steve, changing regularly. And something that engineers aren't so good at is like making a couple of mistakes along the way, because we're going to do that. But I think the most dangerous thing manufacturers could do right now is pause or wait or be overly cautious and risk falling way, way behind. And so my hope is that the folks that we get to work with at CLA, the folks who are in the room here, and more broadly the manufacturers in Indiana, just really lean into this and accept this wonderful opportunity we have to accelerate our growth.
I love the answers across the board tonight. Thank you for sharing your unique knowledge, unique experiences. Hey, let's give it up for Steve, Noel, and Kathy, everyone. Round of applause. Now, we're not quite done. If you listen to Manufacturing Happy Hour, you know there's a way I end my episodes before my tagline. But to get there, I always say, hey, is there anything you wish I would have asked that I haven't yet? So if anyone has something else on their mind up here, or the nice thing about doing this live is if you out there in the audience, you're like, well, gosh, Chris, this was an obvious question you should have asked the whole time. We can do a little Q&A if you want to come up here and take my seat and ask a quick question as well. So we'll start with our three panelists. Was there anything I missed? Anything you want to highlight before we wrap this up?
Well, I'm shocked that you didn't ask me about the impact of psychological safety on innovation.
Let's talk about the impact of psychological safety on innovation.
Sounds like the title for a book.
It is a chapter. But no, when you were talking about people making mistakes along the way, right? It's really hard for high-achieving people, for technical people who rely on precision and that sort of thing. And so it is very important culturally to make sure that people are not afraid of the repercussions of making mistakes and being innovative and trying new things. But those become learning opportunities, not punitive circumstances. I'm really shocked you didn't ask that, but...
next time we do this in Indianapolis, I'll be prepared for that one.
Okay,
so
that was such an open-ended question. I'll give you an open-ended answer. So
deal. That's a fair trade.
So I was raised by a kindergarten teacher, right? So it's all about please and thank you. And actually, there actually is something informative in that process, which is playing well with others. And most unhealthy corporate cultures actually, we don't play well with others, which is give people room for making mistakes, give people grace, give people the ability to think outside the box. Don't judge before you actually understand where they're coming from. And that's actually, it is that culture that actually limits innovation. So if we create a culture that basically penalizes thinking, that's not just part of the normal doctrine of the organization, then we're never going to get any new ideas. And so it's all about how we think.
Excellent. One more round of applause for our panelists tonight, everyone. And a round of applause and a cheers to all of you. And I'm going to end with the tagline this time. Stay innovative, stay thirsty. We still got a long party ahead of us, folks. Everyone enjoy. We'll talk soon. Cheers, everyone.